Hi, everybody. Richard Stiennon here. So I have spent over a decade researching the makeup of the IT security industry. And now, with the publication of my second edition of Security Yearbook, I'm in a position to talk about the entire IT security industry. And I'm going to share that with you today. First, a little information about me, I guess my bio, right? So I'm an industry analyst. Got started in security in 1995, was a VP of research at Gartner, and I've spent some time in executive roles at Webroot Software, Fortinet, and Blancco Technology Group. But let's dig right into the data. So the I use my own categorizations, right? So these are the 16 top categorizations of all the vendors in the IT security space. So this graph is for 2,615. By the time I went to press, I actually had 2,635 vendors cataloged. Um, and it's interesting because year to year, the balance of the top five moves around a little bit. And this year, the majority of vendors are in the data security space. And a lot of that is because data security is such a broad classification, right? It includes all encryption, all secure storage, all secure file transfer. Typically, it's connected to encryption in some way, but a PKI vendor or certificate vendor would be in there as well, since their primary function is easily the most important function in all of IT security, which is keeping our data secure. The space that I've been involved in the most over the years is network security. Got started in a network security company and, met all the founders of Checkpoint and was hired by Gartner in order to write the magic quadrants for network security. There are 376 vendors in that space. Network security is going through a kind of evolution or even a revolution right now, as it's being the traditional big stacks of hardware appliances are being challenged by people moving their workloads to the cloud. And you can't move your appliance into Amazon's data centers, so you have to do something in order to address a completely new architecture. And we're starting to see that, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the winners in that space. Identity and access management has always had a lot of vendors in it because this is where I categorize all the authenticators. So any biometric solution, any, fingerprint, password management, any of those fit here, as do the big, pure play identity and access management solutions that are managing directories of people. GRC is also one of the top five buckets because governance, risk, and compliance is where there are a lot of budgets for security spending. So there are a lot of vendors that help ease the burden, I guess, of governance, risk, and compliance. And there are always new methods for ranking risk and scoring risk. And right now, the hot topic, of course, is third-party risk. And there are a lot of cool vendors in that space that are kind of helping you do your due diligence. Some of them help you fill out the lengthy forms that are required when you're doing due diligence on a new supplier. So cool space, still growing. Now, endpoint security is dropping in number of vendors. So it's of the top five buckets. It's interesting to watch because one, endpoint security is, endpoints are typically Windows, and Microsoft is doing a much better job than they used to on protecting that endpoint. They've got their own product, which is, given away for free with the operating system. And quite often that's good enough for most users. So, and then we've seen the major endpoint vendors, both Symantec and McAfee, kind of fall by the wayside, as they struggled with their business model, which is typically based on we're going to acquire a bunch of things that people need on their endpoints and sell through to those companies. And they missed the boat when it came to endpoint detection and response, the type of stuff that CrowdStrike and Cylance, Carbon Black were all doing. And so they missed their opportunity, right? Is they didn't see the fact that in order to effectively research and write signatures for things that were morphing continuously, and they already saw they're having over 100,000 new signatures to push out every day, that there had to be a better way, and they should be involved in that. So they missed, and now they're going by the wayside. A space that I've followed since 25 years, because I was at one of the first MSSPs, managed security service providers, is growing dramatically, because it's pretty easy to start an MSSP. If you are a reseller of security products, you can offer to manage those and turn a one-time sale into a continuous subscription sale. And so start that way, and then grow your business, because subscriptions are always better than selling licenses or products, and expand into being a full-fledged managed security service provider. IoT security, believe it or not, 131 separate vendors, and within them, they tend to focus on industry or device verticals. So many IoT security vendors are looking at industrial control system security, because that's an entire universe of networked IT products that have never had security applied to them. There's no method for patching them effectively. There's no interest in the vendors of industrial control systems to add security to their products. It's not a value add if you say, hey, my rate controller for your turbo pump is secure. That's not going to be the reason somebody buys that. So they tend to just push out products that are inherently insecure, giving rise to a new category of security vendors that come in later, and they do the classic approach, just as we did with PCs in the 2000s. Now we're coming up with vulnerability management for industrial control systems. We're coming up with firewalls for industrial control systems. We're coming up with patching solutions and even hardening systems, endpoint protection essentially, for industrial control systems. Operations is a relatively new category. As security gets more and more complicated, actually doing your own SOC operations is getting burdensome, and you can't hire the right people in order to do it. So operations are all those vendors that have products that help the SOC, right? So they might have a good asset management solution, or they might have security analytics layered in, or even orchestration, right? So once you've playbooked a response to a certain type of attack, you can turn it into a push button. Hey, this is another attack that looks like this, so just click this button and fix it. Application security is, to me, tied to moving to the cloud, in that if you're moving all your workloads to the cloud, then you have to move your applications there as well, and you have to build security around that as it's happening. So security analytics and XDR are a hot space right now, growing quickly with 97 vendors in it. These are all the guys that are addressing the problems with SIEMs. So security incident and event management systems are extremely noisy and continuously generate false positives, as well as just lists of things that you have to attend to every day in your security operations. So let's make that better by doing a better job of ranking which ones are important and which are not. And a lot of the security analytics vendors are applying machine learning to that information, attempting to make that easier for us. Threat intelligence, 85 vendors that are feeding SIEMs, security analytics solutions, SOCs, with the information they need to identify critical indicators of compromise, or whether or not your company is being targeted. There are still, fraud prevention is the industry that will always be here. Fraudsters continuously figure out ways to compromise accounts or steal information through screen scraping, etc., from e-commerce sites and banking sites. And the fastest path to making money as a startup is to create a fraud prevention solution, because these guys get acquired in about 2 years after launching if they have a better idea. Oddly enough, email security has to be its own category, because it's usually not just endpoint or not just network or not just encryption, but it's a combination wrapped around the most important business application we have, which is our email. And then I've got separate training categories, testing categories, and then deception, which is, an enhancement for security analytics, and that it generates really, really good alerts. And there are only 14 vendors in that space, so it appears to be one that is in early stages, right? Eventually there'll be many, many more. So let's talk just a taste, I guess, of history of the world we're in. I go all the way back to 1993, and I interviewed Gil Schwed to get his origin story. And it's a fascinating story, well worth reading, because Gil, Shlomo, and Maria started Checkpoint Software, the first commercially successful firewall, in 1993. In less than 3 years, they went public. And at the end of last year, beginning of this year, they had a market cap of $18 billion. And the interesting thing about, not only did Checkpoint invent the first successful firewall, they invented the security channel, right? They recruited basically ISPs and resellers into selling security, and created this amazingly powerful channel that they could sell through and not have to deal directly with customers. You saw one of my categories was managed security service providers. They're going through an evolution. So in my mind, an MSSP is offloading some of the burden of managing all those alerts. They might manage a SIM for you. But the new evolution is, no, they're actually going to do your SOC for you. They're going to do your security for you. They're going to do all that monitoring of all your systems. They typically monitor both network and endpoint and users. And then they take proactive measures when they see an attack going on. And there's several dozen of these. eCentire was one of the first that I was exposed to, that is a pure managed detection and response company, but there are others, Fox IT and Blue Voyant, Mnemonic. So all cool companies on a roll, most of them growing very effectively. 11 Paths has grown 100% during 2020, which is pretty cool. 2020 was an extremely good year for security in general. We had a major shift. Everybody had to work from home. And therefore, those companies that could protect work from home employees did extremely well. And it turned out it wasn't the pandemic did not impact the business world as much as was feared. So security continued to grow. I track the valuations of all the publicly traded security companies. And Zscaler came out way on top, 245% growth in market cap, all the way to 26 billion last year alone. Now, CrowdStrike, which is 3 times bigger than Zscaler in terms of revenue and twice as big in terms of market cap, grew a little slower, 233% growth in the year. Another, I call Zscaler, CrowdStrike, and Okta the triumvirate of cloud security, right? Because they're all, even though they're not all delivered from the cloud, Okta and Zscaler are. CrowdStrike has cloud components to it, but it's an endpoint protection company. But they are all benefiting from digital transformation, transitioning to cloud environments. And if you think about it, that's a network provider a identity provider, and an endpoint provider. I'm still searching for who would be the data security provider that's public and growing this quickly. That should be included in that list. Also, M&A activity was pretty astounding in 2020 with 225 acquisitions of cybersecurity companies. This data was collected by America's Growth Capital Partners. And there was quite a broad gamut, right? There was M&A of pure private equity acquiring companies in the hope of infusing capital and growing them quickly. There were existing companies owned by private equity that folded in new companies to their portfolios so they could land and expand in the space. And then there were strategic acquisitions, which I find the most interesting, right? When a big company like VMware right now is getting into security in a big way and doing multiple acquisitions since they acquired Carbon Black the year before. So if I've got all this data, it's kind of interesting to look at the regional distribution of them. The United States is by far the leader in hosting security companies, followed by Israel. I like to publish this because I always get pushback. Oh, Israel's got 1,500 security companies. And no, I've seen everybody's lists, gone through them one at a time, vendor by vendor, and I count 234 security vendors in Israel. UK, third up, and Canada with 102 security vendors, which is I find fascinating because you don't think of Canada as being a technology powerhouse, but all you have to do is look around Ottawa and Vancouver to find these security startups up there, because they did have a seeding company, Nortel Networks, that created a lot of technologists who obviously don't want to move from the frigid north and have created their own security companies. And then, of course, in the United States, I like to look at where the security vendors are located. And by far, of course, California with almost 500 security vendors, followed by New York, Texas. And then you get to Virginia and you realize, wait, Virginia plus Maryland plus DC and parts of Pennsylvania adds up to really the second highest concentration of security vendors, cyber vendors in the United States, all hosted around the DC area, and just feeding off the investment and the acquisitions going on in both military and the federal government. 2020 was also a fantastic year for funding, over $10 billion in new funding for companies. The biggest ones were kind of, financial instruments, I guess, for either publicly traded companies or companies like Palantir that was getting ready to go public when it offered, a mezzanine round to investors of $550 million. And Unisys Stealth, which is another recently public company, took in $485 million in this kind of a similar way. But there's, Sentinel-1 was, a real investment from the venture community, Netscope as well. So we're seeing giant investments. Most of these at these levels turn into unicorns because they get over $1 billion in valuation. Sometimes it doesn't work out. Sometimes when they go public, they're not worth $1 billion. But that's that's the risk that these investors take. So looking ahead, I like to say, as long as threat actors stay in the game, the IT security industry will continue to grow. In other words, there's not going to be a time where we fix this problem, we can all go home. The threat actors continue to evolve and come up with new ways in order to try and extract money out of their activity, or in the case of countries, try and extract benefit that is less than the benefit they get out of shooting missiles across borders, because there's repercussions to doing that, but very few repercussions to temporarily shutting down a pipeline, for instance. M&A is going to continue throughout the year. We've already had some acquisitions in 2021. It's funny how the press always says when there's an acquisition that the industry is consolidating. Well, I've been tracking this industry as an analyst for 21 years, and it's continuously growing. It's not consolidating. When an acquisition is made, that's just how a large vendor acquires a new product line. And every time a vendor in a up and coming sector of the space is acquired, that spawns 5 new vendors, because the investors go, hey, let's invest in the next generation, because those guys will have liquidity events as well. And then I'm convinced that public company, the existing winners that I've already mentioned, are a good investment, because they're, yes, by traditional measures, are overvalued, but security is going to continue to be something that people need, and they're going to have to move to more modern security solutions delivered through the cloud. And therefore, these guys are going to replace some of the older, also equally large, valuated companies. So that's my takeaways, and happy to take questions.